Good evening, everyone. We're so glad you're here. I'm Mary Theroux. I'm Chairman and CEO of the Independent Institute, and we're delighted that you're here this evening for our conversation about our new book, Beyond Homeless: Good Intentions, Bad Outcomes, Transformative Solutions. We're here with a couple of the contributors to the book, Lawrence McQuillan. Lawrence is Senior Fellow and Director of our Center on Entrepreneurial Innovation. He's the author of one of our previous books called California Dreaming: Lessons on How to Restore America's Public Pension Crisis. Lawrence also created our California Golden Fleece Awards, which are awarded quarterly to a state official, program, or agency that is fleecing Californians through waste, fraud, and abuse. And most important feature of the Fleece Awards is that they do propose alternative solutions that would have far better outcomes for us. Lawrence has written quite a few of them, including ones on wildfire policy, housing policy, California's decades-long attempt to enter the 21st century IT world, and many other things. Jonathan Hofer is a research associate with Independent Institute and is also a contributor to tonight's book. Jonathan specializes mostly in privacy issues and has done important studies on automated license plate readers, California's CalGangs database, and he's currently working on a book on the growth of the surveillance city, which will be very interesting. Beyond Homeless started as an initiative really growing out of my 25 years as a volunteer and board member of the Salvation Army. And 6 years ago, our board had a strategic planning session and identified street homelessness as an area in which we thought we could have a really highly positive impact. We formed a task force to start designing programs that could help take people from the streets to achieve their full potential through residential programming of recovery, workforce development, life skills, and so on. As a researcher, I was asked to give the board a briefing on what are the drivers and attributes of homelessness. So I said, fine, I'd be happy to give you a briefing. Started looking into it, and it didn't make any sense. All of the numbers said that California was spending literally billions of dollars a year, and at the same time, homelessness was only increasing, and nothing added up. So that's when Independent decided that we needed to do what we like to do, turn to our researchers and task them with undertaking really rigorous study of what are the drivers, in this case, of our housing and homelessness crises. And again, very importantly, what are solutions to those? So for 40 years, we've been told as California taxpayers to pay our taxes and pass the next bond measure, and government would solve the homelessness crisis. But it doesn't seem to be working. So why is that, Lawrence?
Thank you, Mary.
A simple question.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. This is a wonderful turnout and on a very important topic. So I think the answer to your question is that for too long in California especially, we've measured success in homelessness by how many dollars we spent, not by how many people we've lifted up out of homelessness. And as a result, we keep pouring more and more money into programs that haven't worked. And if you listen to Governor Newsom, he always talks about the billions and billions of dollars that we spend on the topic, but we're not making any progress. He doesn't talk about the numbers on the other side in terms of the growth of homelessness. So for too long, we just focused on the spending side of things and not on the results. So we've had, good intentions, but very bad outcomes in the approach that we've used. And in terms of, so what does that approach look like? So for over decades now, the dominant public policy approach to homelessness is something called housing first. So essentially it has like 4 components. The first is, and this all sounds good in theory, but it doesn't work the way the proponents say it should or does work. So the first element is that you quickly identify people who have become homeless. So you have like street outreach teams that go out and identify people. And then the second step is to house them rapidly in permanent housing. And the third step is the thinking behind that is that you'll then stabilize the person in the permanent housing. And then the fourth and final step is that there'll be lots of supportive services that'll be provided to the person. So all that sounds good, but the problem is in practice it doesn't work, especially in California. First, it's difficult to identify homeless people because a lot of them don't want to be found. So it's difficult to rapidly find people when they enter homelessness because oftentimes they're kind of lost and don't want to be identified. The second step in terms of rapidly housing them, one is a lot of the people refuse to be housed, so they just refuse any kind of services or housing that you offer them. So that's another break in the chain. And then another step is this notion that there's ample housing out there to provide them, which also isn't true. Since Housing First has taken root, there's been a drop in transitionary housing or shelters, and as a result, all the money goes to building more and more so-called permanent supportive housing. But that costs in California a huge amount of money. In some places like Los Angeles, it can cost $1 million just to build one permanent supportive housing unit. So we did a calculation in the book that if you're going to house everybody who's currently unhoused today, homeless in California, you're looking at like $85 to $90 billion just to build housing for the current homeless population in California, and not to mention, the future people that would arrive because they hear, oh, you can get permanent housing in California. So there's a magnet effect too that also happens. So the housing just isn't there to rapidly house them. And then the fourth break in this chain is that the supportive services, they talk about them being available. They're oftentimes not available. They're oftentimes you can enter permanent supportive housing and never get the supportive side. So it doesn't exist or you don't have to participate. So you can always decline participation and stay in this permanent housing situation. But as Mary has noted and other contributors to the book, Housing First often becomes death second because they continue their drug use but they do it in isolation in these permanent homes that are provided by taxpayers. And unfortunately, many of them pass away through overdoses. So unless you connect them with the services and actively make that a priority and actively encourage and constantly motivate people to enter these services, oftentimes they don't take advantage of them or they're not even in existence. So I think the biggest problem is that, again, we've been measuring success through dollars spent, and we've been spending the money on programs like Housing First that really doesn't address the root causes of their homelessness, which is generally substance abuse and mental illness are the primary drivers of it. And I can talk more about that.
And trauma.
Yeah.
So I've talked to a great many people who are experiencing homelessness or have in the past, and I've said there are many reasons for becoming homeless as there are people who are homeless. It's a very individualized thing. Many of the stories that I hear about the childhoods that people have had, I really concluded there, but for the grace of God, go I. And just giving somebody a house isn't addressing those deep traumas or severe mental illness or addiction. And in fact, Lawrence is right. 2/3 of people who die of overdose in San Francisco annually are housed. So they're in isolation and continuing to self-medicate and are dying. So it's a very tragic situation. And we need to realize that it is an individualized thing. And unfortunately, the way that governments tend to work is they do want a one-size-fits-all, here is the educational model, here is the housing model, here is that. And we're individuals. And especially people who have, and can have a great many problems simultaneously, so we need to treat them as such. In addition to housing, and we're not saying that housing first works for some people, but it's not obviously the solution for everybody. And what we're advocating is that we need to have an array of solutions for the array of issues that people are trying to address. The other sort of major federal policy, housing first has been a major federal policy since, it started under Bush. Obama made it official federal policy, and then the state of California adopted it as state policy in 2013. 2016. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and that's directed all of the money into this very, very expensive permanent supportive housing and away from any other approach. The other sort of major federal policy is harm reduction. And as I understand it, Jonathan, from the chapter you contributed, harm reduction actually started as a private initiative. So you can tell us about what is harm reduction? How did it get started? What's it evolved into? And is it helpful or?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Mary. And yes, I contributed to the harm reduction chapter with Mary. And yeah, I think that really rings true with what Lawrence was saying, is that harm reduction and treatment generally requires a bespoke kind of plan tailored to each individual. And when you approach it with a one-size-fits-all policy, you let people slip through the cracks. And you really can't treat some people with maybe like schizophrenia the same way you would treat them with alcoholism. Not only can they not go through the same programs, you need entirely different facilities, potentially different medical care, and potentially entirely different medical environments. So what is harm reduction? I think you can loosely define it as an umbrella term that describes programs and services that can be contrasted with abstinence-only programs. So those would be programs where a cessation of drug use or total sobriety would be a requirement to participate. And the Drug Policy Alliance, which is kind of the forerunner / probably the largest harm reduction advocate group, defines harm reduction in terms of services such as needle exchange programs where people can go to a centralized facility, swap out used syringes for new ones. It could be supervised consumption sites. So that would be where people can take pre-obtained drugs and consume them on site in the context of medical supervision. It could be adulterant screening, which is where you take pre-obtained drugs and you search through them. You can do chemical tests to ensure that there's not fatal amounts of any kind of contaminant. But it could also include things just as privations of Narcan and other opioid reversal agents, first aid, and so forth. And like Mary mentioned, harm reduction really thrives and started as a private endeavor, not really as a government program. Harm reduction really gets off the ground in San Francisco in the United States around the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic. And there you had private groups primarily focused on needle exchange services. And usually this was done against the law. So paraphernalia laws usually prohibit things like needle exchange programs, especially at that time. And so what happened? You did see a number of notable benefits to harm reduction, especially the needle exchanges, insofar as it reduced soft tissue infections, lowered instances of, especially of hepatitis C, medical costs associated with caring for people who had soft tissue infections dropped quite significantly. And the total cost to the taxpayer in terms of reduced costs to the medical system for treating people without insurance or coverage dropped as well. So it's not good at other things. For example, we kind of talk about this in the books in the context of reducing homelessness. It's not really primed for that. We like to think of it as something that you're kind of offering someone a lifeline. You're meeting them where they are to kind of buy them some time to get them to recovery. You don't really want to leave people just on their own devices to let them fend for themselves. And naturally, people would ask, well, why do we think that it's best handled as a private solution versus a government solution? There's a couple of advantages when charities do this versus the government. First off would be trends in drug use. Similar to other markets, drugs come in fads, and due to availability of certain substances or just whatever is cool at the time, drug trends can change quite rapidly. For example, in San Francisco, there's a street drug called Trank. It was added to fentanyl. It was highly lethal and caused a lot of accidental overdoses. Bureaucracies can't really handle quick changes. It requires a private organization to be able to move swiftly enough to be able to respond. And similarly, just other kind of features of bureaucracy can't really do harm reduction very well.
So the official definition of harm reduction is that it's a whole range of things, including recovery and abstinence. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
But it's not really practiced that way
Correct.
in the current practice. So we're doing a second documentary. We'll talk about our first documentary in a minute. And we have a young man whose story we're featuring, and he had grown up under heroin addicted parents, and his mother died of an overdose when he was 13. So he kept drawing lines in the sand as he fell into drug use and homelessness, and mainlining heroin was absolutely the last line in the sand he was ever going to cross. But he was using heroin intramuscularly, and he went to a harm reduction needle. It's not exchange, it's needle handout. You don't have to hand in a dirty needle. Goes in, young guy in his early 20s, and they give him a needle and they give him a pamphlet with very explicit instructions on. It also says, no, doing it intramuscularly isn't good for you. It's much better to mainline, and very explicit instructions on how to do it. Step-by-step instructions. So he said, being one not to, scorn government sanctioned advice, he followed it. And he said, who would give a clean, kid with no skid marks a pamphlet on how to mainline heroin with no information about access to recovery? And unfortunately, that's the way it's being practiced now. Is it's supposed to reduce the harm of using drugs to, prevent you from the ill effects of using drugs, so that, as Jonathan said, you have a chance to live and reach recovery. But in practice, it's just enabling the use of addiction, which is a problem with it. Probably the most brilliant contribution that Lawrence has made to this whole thing is when Beyond Homeless grew out initially of a policy report we did a few years ago, and the book is an expansion and an update of that. And at the time that we were doing the policy report, Lawrence said, we should do a documentary. And we said, well, that sounds like a really good idea, Lawrence. So we produced a short documentary called Beyond Homeless, Finding Hope. And it's 40 minutes long, and it's very solutions oriented, and it presents a very hopeful vision that the way things are is not the way they have to be. And we purposely did not put it on YouTube. We didn't get it on a sort of mass market thing because we wanted to use it to make connections with people and build a community that could work together in advancing some of the alternative solutions that we think would offer better hope to people experiencing homelessness in the status quo. And it's proven to be that way. We've done screenings with civic groups all over we've done screenings all over the country, but a ton of screenings here locally with a lot of civic groups, neighborhood organizations, churches, the adult reentry unit, just all at Manny's in San Francisco, all kinds of venues. And again, since it's short, it's 40 minutes long, and it's very hopeful, audiences get very excited because people have, over the years, the decades that we've seen homelessness get worse and worse here, people have gotten skeptical and have started thinking, it's hopeless, and especially, what can I do? There's nothing I can do about it. And I think the documentary especially casts a vision that, yes, there is something you can do about it. You can be a part of it. And as a result, we ended up with a lot of people who are very interested in getting involved. And we've been holding convenings with them to explore different solutions and different ideas, initiatives that if we come around them together, we can have more success than all these different groups are doing individually. So that's the real title of tonight's evening, is how community can help homelessness. So we've seen this book also talks about there are kind of two levels of community. We know that being in community helps people heal better than being in isolation. And that's another critique of the housing first solution, is it tends to put people into isolation versus some of the models we talk about in here. Do you want to talk about some of the programs we found, Lawrence?
Well, yeah, I was just going to do a shout out to the programs because they all provided us with experts from within their organization that we could talk to. So we go well beyond what's available on the web, and when we talk about the actual practitioners at these organizations. So one that I'm sure Mary's going to talk about in depth is Haven for Hope in San Antonio, Texas. Another one is Step Denver, it's called, in Denver, Colorado. We also cover Urban Rescue Mission, Andy Bale's operation, or former operation, I guess now, in Los Angeles and in Skid Row in LA. And the Salvation Army that Mary mentioned that she's been intimately involved with for decades. And then last but not least is a organization in San Diego called Solutions for Change. And they focus more on families, I believe, and uplifting families from homelessness. So those are 4 or 5 different organizations that we cover in the book. They all have a common theme, which is individualized care and long-term commitment to each individual. So some of these people can stay up to 2 years in some of these programs, but that's often what it takes for them to really fulfill the commitment to the program and escape homelessness and their various traumas and dependencies that they've developed as a result. So those are kind of a broad overview of the 5 that are mentioned in chapter 7 on alternative models. But I know Mary can talk and will talk a lot about Haven because she's been involved with them.
Well, one of the things that's come out of this is we have made connections with a lot of different organizations, and also we've started making a lot of connections with public officials in the Bay Area, especially, who obviously homelessness is a huge problem. And I think increasingly it's being recognized that it's being widely recognized, including in the public sector, that what's been being done isn't working and is opening minds to perhaps ideally considering other approaches. So last night, 11 o'clock, I got home from a 2-day delegation that we led to Texas, and we had representatives from the mayors of San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland, and San Jose, including the heads of homelessness of 3 of those cities. We had 4 state senators. We had several elected officials and their aides, as well as service providers, philanthropists, and other interested parties. In total, we had 50 people with us from here. So we went to San Antonio and we visited Haven for Hope. Haven for Hope is a 22-acre campus in downtown. It's literally right outside of downtown San Antonio. And it's a campus that has both immediate shelter, where people who just want to get off the street can have a bed, a hot shower, a meal, and access to services, but they don't have to commit to being part of the program. They don't have to commit to sobriety or giving up drugs or so on. And they can come and go as they choose, though there is a curfew at night to keep things safe. The larger part of it is called the Transformational Campus, where people who want to take the next step and achieve their full potential can get very individualized help from 80 nonprofits that work at the campus and can address. They literally interview you and say, what happened to you and what is your barrier to achieving the life you want? And then they'll form a team to help you overcome that barrier. And once you've achieved that goal, then, okay, what's your next barrier? And again, people can stay as long as they want, but it turns out that they're able to get people on their way to their next phase of life very quickly, and they have a very high success rate of people staying housed, staying employed after leaving the program. So this delegation went and visited Haven for Hope, and then in that afternoon we visited with San Antonio officials, because the real secret of Haven for Hope is that they brought the entire city and county together. It grew out of a conversation that a local businessman and the mayor had about their growing homelessness problem. San Antonio is very dependent on tourism. And as homelessness was growing, they saw their lifeblood literally at risk and knew they needed to do something. So they came together, but very importantly, they involved every sector, including the sectors that are often most overlooked: fire, emergency, the hospital systems, all of the nonprofits, the public sector, the county, the business community, and so on. They formed a task force. They spent 2 years visiting programs all over the country to find best practices and created a strategic plan, which resulted in the campus. But again, the important part is that the entire community remains part of it and very involved in it. And it's now 15 years old. They've served thousands upon thousands of people, and they have decreased their unsheltered homelessness downtown by 85% in a period of time that we have seen ours explode. The next day we went to Austin, where there's a very different program called Community First Village. It's a 53-acre piece of land, and it has tiny homes on it, but they're spread out. I mean, it's literally like neighborhoods, and the homes are very individualized. They're not cookie cutter tiny homes. And it serves chronically homeless. Chronically homeless means you've been on the street for some period of time, and you have, and they especially serve older people who probably, are not going to become integrated back into the wider community, be employable, and so on. So it's a lovely, peaceful home, and it's meant to be a permanent home for the 500 people who live there. And it's absolutely lovely. It was founded by a pastor who felt called to go out and serve the homeless, and then realized these are people who needed a home and they needed the peace. And he gives them that peace and that community. Again, it's community that heals. It's being with other people that heals us. We are relational human beings. And Austin as well. Community First is also very integrated with the wider Austin community. People go there to live among the people who live there, to literally walk alongside them and help them with whatever their need may be, work with them in the arts and all kinds of things. It's a lovely community. And again, our delegation visited there, and then in the afternoon we met with Austin officials, and we talked about what they've learned and how they've been very successful. So through all this, again, our real mission here is to create community. And to create community here in the Bay Area, what we discovered is we just have a lot of silos. We've got a lot of people who care deeply about homelessness. We've got a million programs. Every city government has several initiatives going on about it, is putting lots of money into it. We have a lot of nonprofits working on it. We have a lot of civic organizations, business organizations who care about homelessness. But they hadn't been in community together. They were working on it in isolation. So what we've been working on is bringing people together, again, to learn, to share ideas, and ideally, at the end of the day, though the day won't end, to design some initiatives that if we come around together, we can have better progress than we're able to do individually. I've talked too much, and I'm so sorry. Would you like to add anything before we open it up to?
Oh, I was just going to say, on that point of there's a lot of services that are normally available, but they are quite siloed. If you look on San Francisco's website, and maybe you guys know what I'm talking about, there's a web of services that looks like the stereotypical like conspiracy theorist like board that has like the red strings everywhere, and they tout this as something that they're proud of. But you might get a referral from one of those services to another service, but put your like self in someone's shoes who's perhaps on the street. You don't have a car. Maybe like alcohol treatments in one part of the city, but then you need to get some like financial coaching somewhere else. It's an impossible thicket to navigate. You really do need a almost intake system like Haven for Hope has, where you can kind of hold people's hands to show them like, okay, you need this, then this, and this in the sequence, and here's the priorities, and here's how you can like accomplish like your treatment plan or whatever you need. Maybe it's just like something temporary, and you need to check that box, but if you have so much silos, you really aren't helping people sufficiently to get them off the street.
And one other aspect to Haven for Hope that I think is worth mentioning is that it's a campus, as Mary mentioned, it's the campus facility with on-site partners, but there's also off-site partners as well. But one thing Haven does very well is they monitor each partner to make sure they're actually doing their job. Whereas with governments, there's very little oversight and accountability. The money just keeps flowing, whether or not they're successful with their program or not. But Haven has a policy of really monitoring all of these partners closely. If they're not getting the job done, they're out of the program. They're no longer a partner. So there's a lot more accountability with the system than there would be if the government was operating and funding it. Because as I detail in the book, there's many instances where the money just keeps flowing, even though they're not achieving the performance standards and levels that they promise. Also, in some cases, in one case, the San Francisco Standard outed the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing for providing $88 million to nonprofits in San Francisco that were not legally entitled to receive funding. The state attorney general actually had crossed them off the list for various improprieties over the years, and yet they were still receiving money from the San Francisco government to provide services. And there was no record that they were doing any good, but they were still getting $88 million. So unlike San Francisco, the good thing about a campus facility like Haven is they actually monitor all their partners and making sure that they're hitting certain performance metrics every year, or they're out of the program.
Because earlier this year, it got a lot of press, so presumably everybody heard about it. The California audit that showed that California has spent $24 billion over the past 5 years, and that's got to be an understatement, on homelessness, and can't account for where it went. And $24 billion over 5 years, and no idea where it went or what outcome it achieved. So obviously that's a problem. When we were with these officials over the last couple of days, one of them raised the point that very mystified that taxpayers seem to be losing their taste for funding these programs, and I, as nicely as I could, said, well, it's not all that inexplicable, because there've been an audit after audit, and the city of Oakland did an audit, the state did an audit, everybody's always doing audits, and they all say the same thing: is there no strategy was created, no accountability was defined, and nobody knows where the money went and what it achieved. And then the other thing is, we've just seen headline after headline of corruption such as this. I mean, the U.S. Attorney General, just after he heard about California's having $24 billion go down out of the hole, he formed a task force, an investigation into where the money's gone. He just yesterday or the day before arrested 2 supposed to be homeless housing developers who were enriching themselves and having, but it had been going on for years and years, and it's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And fine, but we want to catch the guys who are taking the money and running, but what about the people who are giving them the money? It's our money. I'm kind of not happy with them. And it's like Harry Brown used to say, when you strew raw meat in the street and wild dogs show up, you don't blame the dogs. I think we need to get the collective we. But I'm glad that the elected officials are feeling that we're not all just now saying, oh yes, here's my tax dollars, and yes to the next bond measure. I think there really is a awakening that they're not achieving the outcomes we want for our when I talk to all these groups and do the screening, I wasn't sure what attitude I'd find, if it was people like, just get those people out of the street, they're just making a mess. I found a lot of compassion, almost universal compassion among everybody. Of they care deeply. They do not like seeing people suffering in the street, and they want them to be helped. And I think there's a growing recognition that what we've been doing has not been helping them, and we need to do it a new way. And hopefully, with our efforts and similar ones of creating community and talking about, what would really help, we'll get somewhere here. And I'm very optimistic about it. Our delegation was very excited and optimistic, and we will be having ongoing workshopping around it. So with that, unless you want to add anything else, we'll open it up. Okay. Yeah. Debbie?
Yes, hold on.
Behind you.
Hold on.
I watched the documentary. I think it's a very powerful documentary. I would like to hear how, in the next 5 years, in your dream world, things would be different in Alameda County, San Francisco, Northern California.
Mary?
I don't know if I could tell you my dreams, but I think we are working well on coming together around solutions that can address. Again, homelessness is such an individual thing. We need a whole lot of different individualized pathways for people to follow, including a lot of communities of care, therapeutic communities, and other models. In my dream, we would have paths established, and there's no reason why we couldn't. There are people of goodwill. There's plenty of money. It's just being misdirected. And, we're the entrepreneurs of the world right here. And then there's no reason why we can't then say public spaces are for public use and they're not for living. I mean, these are not conditions for human beings to be living in. And to be able to say, you cannot stay in the street. You can go here. You can go here. We have this program. We have this program. We have this program. We have this program. We have a bus ticket, whatever, but you cannot be here. And restore the life and the vibrancy of our communities for all of us, including the people who are currently suffering. So. We've been working. So the former Holy Names University in Oakland closed a few years ago. It's 60 acres. It's a beautiful facility. We've been talking to a great many people about the possibility of repurposing it. It's still a work in progress. But that would be like, a stage for once people have come out of crisis and they're ready for the step of education and life skills and so on. It'd be a wonderful place for that, because one of the other really key things is you need to provide what is called trauma-informed design, places for people to live that are calming and pleasant, not institutional, not gray walls in the repurpose this, that, or the other thing. You need to provide people with an environment where they truly can calm and enjoy beauty, nature, whatever, which will help address that trauma and so on, and is part of the healing process. So you need to find things but there's tons. There are people say, oh, the Bay Area, it's so crowded, you'd never do that here. There are tons of sites here, and we've been identifying a lot of them, and hopefully can get people excited about getting them developed. Yes.
if I may.
Yes.
So to answer your question, I think one reason to be hopeful is that last year the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision saying that it's not cruel and unusual punishment to clear people off of the commons and to sweep encampments. So now we're seeing more local governments that are passing more zero tolerance laws. There's a few, like Longview, Washington passed one, Indio in California, Palm Springs in California, Fresno has one. So local communities are getting more aggressive about saying, as Mary said, you can't sleep here anymore in common property. Kind of the notion was, well, nobody owns it, so anybody can do whatever they want to on common property. But it's just not true. Otherwise, you see what happens in communities like, the Jungle in San Jose, Skid Row in LA, Tenderloin in San Francisco, the Zone in Phoenix, which they cleaned up. So the Supreme Court decision allowed now local governments to impose more aggressive anti-camping laws and to sweep communities. But it only works if you have somewhere to move them to. Otherwise, you're just playing whack-a-mole and you're not improving the community. You're just moving the problem. And let's face it, large groups of people living in areas where it's not meant for human habitation, it becomes very dysfunctional, very dangerous, very unsanitary, and it's not fair to the people who are getting up every morning and taking their kids to school and going to work. So you need a balance. So you need to be aggressive in terms of preserving your neighborhoods, reclaiming them, restoring them. But you also then need facilities like Haven, which has this two-tiered system of the courtyard that you mentioned, which is a low barrier. Anybody can go there. And that's where a lot of the 85% reduction in homelessness in San Antonio, downtown San Antonio, went to the courtyard. And then at that point, they're constantly being reminded that there's this recovery aspect, the transformational campus available. So whenever you're ready, knock on our door and we'll admit you to this more transformational recovery treatment program. But you do have to have some place where you can sweep people from neighborhoods and then move them to an area where then they're put in a situation where that it's not only safer for them. 1/3 of all fires in Los Angeles County are involve unhoused people. So I mean, it's very dangerous. People die. Unhoused people die all the time on the street. So it's safer for them to be moved to like a campus facility, but also then they're highly motivated. They're always put in contact with people every day who say, "Are you interested? Is now your time to enter recovery?" So they kind of get a constant reminder, and they see friends that are probably enter the program, come out sober and independent, self-sufficient individuals, and hopefully that would motivate them too. If Joe can do it, I can do it, type of thing. So it's better to have these facilities than to just let people live on the street as they want, because it's not good for them and it's not good for the community.
People die on the streets. Yeah. The average age is quite young.
I'm a visitor, and I have been doing help for the homeless for 25 years. And it's an interdenominational program. It's in Contra Costa County. It takes in the whole entire congregation of Contra Costa County. What you three have said is absolutely phenomenal, and it needs to be heard by everybody. But I have another little end of this story. You've talked about the drug addicts, the people who won't and don't want your help. A lot of them do not want your help. Our program is called Winter Nights, and the families are screened, and they only take families. And they make sure there are no drugs in this family, no alcohol, And the families go in, and they can go in from September all the way to June. And in those months, these families are helped with getting a job, a house. Their kids are taken to school every day. The parents are all made sure that all their kids have their shots and health. And the whole program is built around making these families healthy and ready to be on their own. Last year, they had 100% of their families housed. And the other big thing about these families are that by the people who are renting to them know that if they have gone through winter nights, they have been taught right from left. And these families get taken into housing quickly and very well helped by the Coalition of Health of Churches Coalition. We house them, we give them their furniture and everything, and wish them on good luck. You have the adult program. We need more people to write. You people, I know nothing about any of you. I'm sure could write a charter or for money for this program of winter nights.
Well, there are a lot of, we've found wonderful programs. Thank you so much. We're glad to hear about that. There are wonderful programs everywhere we've seen and found. And that's exactly right, is we need social entrepreneurship of people establishing programs such as that do serve, as we said, very different populations. It's not a homogenous whole of people experiencing homelessness. So we want social entrepreneurship. And one of the key solutions or recommendations of the book is that resources be directed to programs that demonstrate the outcomes we're looking for. And that's exactly right. Paul, we have a question right here. Is it you? You had a question? She had a question. Wait for that, please.
Have you had any experience with programs that have an assessment tool for evaluating the most likely to succeed with services, the most likely to accept services and succeed? Like I've read that the first group you ought to look at are the employed homeless, and look for housing for them, and then work down the scale. But I've never seen an assessment tool that might facilitate that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of, yes, there are populations that are easier to help. We, again, back to social entrepreneurship, just as we don't have one kind of store for one kind of person, we don't need, one program for one thing. And that's one of the interesting things is what we have here in California too. And this talks about our housing crisis and what's driving that, because especially, people who are working, who are experiencing homelessness, it is generally speaking a problem that there's no place that their paycheck can cover. And we've destroyed more single room occupancy hotels and other cheap housing in this state than we have people experiencing homelessness. So that's a huge part of it, is we've removed, and I'm not talking about affordable housing that the government provides and which is not affordable and it's very expensive to read. I'm just talking about cheap housing that give you your first apartment, your first place to live, from which you can then go up. I don't know if you want to talk about the housing aspect at all, Lawrence.
Well, I was going to talk about her question. Okay. These groups do have an incentive to identify the people who would be best targeted with their funds. And so they have an incentive to do like a triage type process where they try to identify those who are most likely to succeed. So I think that's like part of a privately funded, privately managed organization, is they don't want to waste their donors' money. So they're going to try to find and identify the people who would benefit first and most quickly. The medical research that I've read, it's the median or the mean is about between 5 and 7 attempts before someone successfully completes a program. So you'd probably want to try to find the person who's tried it 4 or 5 times, because they're probably closest to actually succeeding. Unfortunately, it does take a lot of try and fail and come back and try and fail. The best groups realize that, and they don't kick them out permanently. They might take them out of the sober living facility and put them somewhere else, but they usually don't turn their back on them. I think that's important. But yeah, I think there's kind of built into these private organizations an incentive to use the donor money to maximize the payoff for the funding. And so they have an incentive to try to identify those who are, I think, most likely to recover and benefit from their program and kind of work down the list. But again, you don't really have that with government money, because they get paid by probably how many people enter the program, not how many people leave the program successfully. So that's the key, is to incentivize success, not failure.
And we see that. So in San Francisco, and well, in California, under Obamacare, all of the detox and recovery programs got cartelized, and it's all under Medi-Cal now. So you see people are funded through Medi-Cal to go through 60 or 90 days of detox and recovery. But then when they leave, they're either placed into permanent supportive housing, which is mixed housing. So the 10 people living on your floor may all still be actively using or having mental health crises or others, and it's very hard to stay in recovery under those circumstances. Or they go back to the street, or they go to the housing, they don't like it, then they go back to the street. Anyway, social workers call it a washing machine. And it's not only expensive, it's very grating for a human being to go through that over and over again. So we want paths for success, and we want to enable resources to flow to the programs that achieve the success. So many questions. Help me.
Hi, I had a question about the Austin program. You mentioned that there were 500 units and that was permanent housing. How does that work? Don't they just fill up and they don't have any more available?
They keep expanding.
Okay, so
they're about to open phase 5. It's private, and since they have demonstrated such success in providing people a dignified lifestyle and a wonderful environment, and again, it's a Christian ministry, they get lots and lots of money from California's billionaires who are now in Austin, and some of their own too. So they get and they're about to open, I think, stage 5.
Okay.
So they're just expanding. But yeah, yes, of course, it does fill up. But again, it's also older people, and unfortunately, people have been on the streets for a long time, have shorter lifespan. So they also lose a certain number every year. But apparently that number is also declining, which
that would be good news.
Yeah, that is good news. There are a whole lot of questions, and I can't even begin to keep track.
Yeah, if I may, I've spent about 40 years working with a lot of different homeless people and often employing them. And I divide the homeless into 2 or 3 or 4 groups, depending on their capabilities. And I would like to actually refer to what I call the semi-housed people, who are living in shacks that they've built, or cars or RVs. And in Berkeley, I went to the big distributing post office, and for about 6 blocks all around, every parking space was full of vans and RVs and cars with people living in them and living pretty good lives and having a community. The cars are such cheap housing. The vehicles, they barely run, but they just sit there most of the time. And I just wonder, why couldn't we just give them part of our regional park or something and build a big campground for them it's, I go backpacking. I don't even have available showers. And it seems to me, instead of spending $100,000 or more on about half the homeless, each year, $8,000 a month, we could spend $1,000 a month and give them at least a stable, safe place to stay in their vehicle. Does anybody consider that as opposed to building a $400,000 apartment?
Well, of course, we're not proposing $400,000 apartments. That's the government's doing, and they're not 400,000; they're 800,000 or a million.
Or 900 to
Yeah.
a million.
But there are a lot. There are a lot of very cost-effective ways of providing people shelter, and I appreciate that a car is better than sleeping on the sidewalk, but it's still not a place to live, and we do want people to have access to,
Yeah, I mean, even like a trailer RV park it's nearly impossible to get it permitted in the Bay Area. Yeah. Yeah.
It's our bureaucracy.
Well, because the neighbors don't want it, number one. And then they go to their, legislators in City Hall, and then they don't give them a permit for it. There's one that's trying to be built right now, a fairly large one in Bayview, Hunters Point. Because they closed the one at Candlestick Point. So they're trying to get one open there, a large one, but so far, no progress.
Well, the experience of the one at Candlestick was, I forget how much money they spent and how much trouble they had. Again, we want social entrepreneurs to be operating these things, because the other thing is the government doesn't take very good care of the people in its care. We saw that during COVID when they ran these hotels, Project Roomkey. They turned into kind of Lord of the Flies arrangements. And I'm not kidding. There were some undercover journalists who went in and saw what was going on. And plus, I mean, these hotels now are suing the city to recover damages, and it's millions and millions of dollars. For one hotel was suing for $25 million in damages, incredibly expensive. And then it not only was going on inside, but it was spilling out into the neighborhood surrounding. And the difference for something like Haven for Hope and Community First is they take full accountability and full responsibility for both the people in their care and for their neighbors in the surrounding community, and make sure that Haven's been operating for 15 years, and it's a community of, and even people in just overnight shelter. And it's a very volatile population often. And they haven't had a violent incident on campus in 15 years because they have so much security. And it's security that is also trained in interacting with that population. So they see that somebody is getting kind of agitated, they can calm them down. They also screen very carefully that even if you're coming in to spend the night, that you don't have any weapons with you. This gentleman here.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing your insights. And a lot of your critiques of the current program sort of resonate. And I live in Berkeley, and I see taxes going up and problems getting worse. But I'm curious, what I did not hear, I guess, is like what you're proposing really as solutions. So if I go back and I want to like write my council member in Berkeley, it's like, I went to this talk and, here are 3 things that you should consider. What would those 3 things be?
Well, we had a representative from Berkeley with us on our delegation learning about it. So it's what we're proposing. I mean, ultimately, we would like to propose is that social entrepreneurs be allowed to set up programs with a much lower barrier than currently exists. And again, that funding be directed to positive outcomes. Haven is a public-private partnership. It operates incredibly efficiently, but about half its money comes from government, half from privately. But they are also, the other thing about having private money is it keeps you accountable to your donors, which these publicly funded things don't do it. So I really encourage more public-private partnerships, and then measurement. What are your outcomes? How are you measuring it? if you're achieving good outcomes, let's direct more resources your way. If you're not achieving good outcomes, we're going to help somebody who is.
And also enforce the public purposes of public spaces. So sidewalks, alleys, streets, parks, school grounds, those are meant for specific purposes, not for habitation. So make sure that, local officials understand that the community doesn't want this anymore. And they don't have to put up with it since the Supreme Court decision in 2024. Like, we want to change. We want to reclaim our neighborhoods, make them safe and clean and places that people want to live.
And also another thing is, of course, we want more of all the above. And we really do like this one-stop shop model where you give every single person bespoke treatment, whether that's like financial assistance that's temporary, or it's coaching, whether it's recovery services, and things that reduce the barrier would go a long way. So that could include anything from like permitting reform in the city, CEQA waivers so that people can build the infrastructure and things like that.
Thank you.
One final question.
Oh, it's a really easy question for Jonathan.
Oh, thank you.
And I will note, we have had successful RV camping solutions in Mountain View for 6 or 7 years that have been quite effective and quite successful. So, Jonathan, having worked at Highland Hospital, one of the things that we dealt with were a lot of people with pain problems that usually were drug abusers, and they would come in and get involved. And I learned that the success rate in turning these people around was about 10%. So my question to you is, how do we deal with the people that can't be reconciled to community, that are involved in crime, involved in drugs? How do we deal with this part of our community solution?
The easy question, yeah. It could be a variety of responses, depending on the level of addiction. Maybe some kinds of medical intervention are possible. For example, naltrexone is a commonly prescribed opiate where it causes the nervous system to not respond. Yeah, exactly. Then the other thing would be in severe cases. One of the things that California is doing is they're adopting this thing called the Care Court, which is not the same thing as a jail diversion program, but it's meant to augment it in kind of the civil law case, where people who are kind of fiduciaries of, or maybe some like a family member or a friend, let's say that they're suffering from drug addiction, they can petition the state for help, and that could be, in severe cases, possibly commitment or conservatorship. So someone would help you run your life. Of course, that needs safeguards in of itself. We actually do talk about this at length in the book. I'm sorry, it's not quite a simple answer, but it has to be very tailored to the individual, in short.
And there are look to programs who's achieving higher outcomes. What's their methodology? Should we direct more resources towards that and be using that versus that? Anyway, we haven't answered everything, but we've had a wonderful discussion. We are very grateful to all of you being here, and hope we'll see you at a future Independent Institute event. Good night.
Direct to do that.